The legend of Burin and Luthien's love, which transcended death, was like a lightning bolt in the darkness, brief yet blinding. It illuminated the despair-shrouded skies of Beleriand and rekindled the long-extinguished fire of hope in the hearts of elves and men. They perceived that even the most formidable Dark Lord was not invincible. In the year First Age 468, at the fortress of Himring in East Beleriand, Maedhros, the eldest son of Fëanor, was profoundly moved by this legend. His severed wrist seemed to ache no longer, and the heavy burden in his heart, born of the kinslaying and the oath of Fëanor, seemed lightened. Seeing a glimmer of victory, he began with great passion and resolve to travel far and wide, uniting every force available in an attempt to forge an unprecedented alliance aimed at the total defeat of Morgoth. This was the beginning of the great endeavor later known as the Union of Maedhros. His call was actively answered by nearly all the Noldor, the three houses of men, and even the dwarves of the Blue Mountains. In that same year, within the house of Hadar, a new life, Hadholder, was born, yet he did not know he was to grow up in a tragic era of heroes and rivers of blood. 1 year later, in First Age 469, the power of the Union began to bear fruit. In several coordinated campaigns, they successfully swept away the orc armies entrenched in the heart of Beleriand, at one point pushing the front line back to the very gates of Angband. This temporary victory left everyone immersed in optimism. It was also in this year that Burin and Luthien, in accordance with the will of Iluvatar, were reborn as mortals. They returned to Osiriand and settled on a verdant island in the middle of the river Adurant called Tol Galen, living thereafter in seclusion, apart from the world. However, in Dorlaman, a shadow of grief descended upon the house of Hurin. His young daughter, Lalaith, fell ill and perished due to an evil, Morgoth-tainted blight drifting from the north. Her death cast an ominous portent over the future of the household. In First Age 470, on the island of Tol Galen, Dior, the son of Burin and Luthien, was born. He inherited his father's mortal blood, his mother's elven grace, and the majesty of his maternal grandmother, the Maya. He was hailed as Dior Luchel, meaning Thingol's heir. That same year, in the house of Hadar, Hayden was born. The armies of the Union continued to grow, and new life continued to emerge. Everything seemed to be moving in a direction of light. In First Age 471, Halmir, chieftain of the House of Halath, passed away. His son, the valiant Halder, became the new lord of the Forest of Brethil. He immediately answered the call of Maedhros, leading the elite axe-bearers of his people to join the Union. In the spring of First Age 472, on the eve of the Great War, Hurin, lord of Dorlaman, held a grand wedding for his young brother, Huor, and the beautiful Rian. It was a wedding held amidst the cold glint of swords and the longing for hope, filled with tragic romance. Huor and Rian loved one another deeply, but they both knew that the coming war might be their final farewell. On midsummer, the day of the year with the longest light, Maedhros deemed the time ripe. He gathered all the armies of the Union and arrayed them upon the plains of Enfoglath, preparing for a decisive battle against Morgoth to determine the fate of Beleriand. The eastern host consisted of Maedhros and all his brothers, the loyal Easterling chieftain Bor and his people, and the dwarves from Belagost and Nogrod. The western host was composed of the Noldoran High King Fingon, Hurin, and Huor of Hithlum with the warriors of the House of Hadar, Halder and his people of Brethil, as well as the elves of the Falas and a small contingent from Nargothrond. Their plan was for the eastern host to take the initiative, luring Morgoth's main force out of Angband, whereupon the western host would envelop them from the flanks and annihilate them. However, they knew not that Morgoth, through the treachery of his deceitful servants, Ulfang and his sons, already held full knowledge of the Union's plans. This battle, known to later ages as the Nirnath Arnediad, or Unnumbered Tears, was shrouded in betrayal and doom from the very beginning. As the eastern host of Maedhros advanced according to plan, Morgoth held his forces in reserve, sending only a small contingent to harass them. Meanwhile, he invoked sorcery to conjure a black, suffocating mist in the valleys of Hithlum, where the western host was stationed. King Fingon, though anxious, remained composed, awaiting the signal for the assault. Yet, the harrowing cries of orc-held prisoners being cruelly tormented, and the provocative spectacle of Gelmir, the brother of the Nargothrond Prince Gwyndor, being dismembered in public, ignited the fury of the Noldor. Driven by uncontrollable grief and rage, the western host launched their charge prematurely. In the early stages of the battle, the Western Coalition was unstoppable, charging all the way to the gates of Angband. But this was all a trap by Morgoth. The gates of Angband suddenly swung wide, and the main force concealed within poured out, surrounding the Western army. At this moment, the horns of the eastern host finally sounded, and the army of Maedhros attacked from the rear. The tide of battle seemed to turn. Yet, the most fatal betrayal occurred at that juncture. The sons of Ulfang, those Easterling traitors lurking within the Union, suddenly turned their blades and struck the army of Maedhros from behind. This sudden blow threw the eastern ranks into chaos. The loyal Boar and his sons fought valiantly but perished to a man. The eastern host collapsed, and the 7 sons of Fëanor, though they fought like lions, were severely wounded and forced to retreat toward Mount Domd in the south. The western host was thus plunged into desperate isolation. Glorung the dragon and his brood crawled out from Angband, charging into the fray. Azagul, lord of the dwarves of Belagost, though clad in heavy armor and unafraid of dragon fire, was trampled to death by Glorung. Before he perished, he used his final strength to drive his battle-axe deep into the dragon's belly. In agony, Glorung retreated in haste back to Angband. On the other side of the battlefield, Fingon, High King of the Noldor, was surrounded by Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, and his guard. Fingon fought until his final moment, but was eventually ensnared by Gothmog's whip of flame, and another Balrog clove his helmet, adorned with white feathers, with a black axe. Thus did the valiant High King fall on the field of the Nirnath Arnediad. The battle was decided. The defeat could not be reversed. Hurin and Huor, leading their final contingent of men, built a last wall of flesh in the marshes of Surion, covering the retreat of King Turgon of the Hidden City and his Gondolin elves. So long as we stand, the orcs shall not cross these marshes. Hurin roared at Turgon. In that fierce rearguard action, Haldir, lord of the House of Halath, was slain. Huor, having foreseen that Turgon would be the final hope of elves and men, was struck through the eye by a poisoned orc arrow and sacrificed himself bravely. In the end, only Hurin remained, backed against the marsh, wielding his great axe like a god of war. It is said that for every orc he slew, he cried out Orentaliva. Day shall come again. He shouted it 70 times. The corpses of orcs piled high around him, but at last, exhausted, he was taken alive. Hurin was brought before Morgoth. The Dark Lord sought to force him to reveal the location of Gondolin, but Hurin only stared at him with contempt and laughed aloud. In his fury, Morgoth did not slay him, but bound him with magical chains to a stone seat atop Thangorodrim, forcing him to witness with his own eyes the poisonous curses that would descend upon all his kin. The Nirnath Arnediad ended in the total ruin of the Union. Turgon, upon returning to Gondolin, inherited the title of High King of the Noldor, but he sealed the city gates and withdrew from the world. Most of the surviving elves fled to the havens of the Falas, seeking the protection of Círdan. The entirety of Hithlum was gifted by Morgoth to those treacherous Easterlings. They enslaved the remaining elders, women, and children of the House of Hadar, living under a brutal tyranny. In the autumn, when the tidings of defeat reached Dorlaman, Morwen, who was with child, made a painful decision to protect her young son, Turin, from the Easterlings. She sent Turin secretly to far-off Doriath, pleading for the protection of King Thingol. Meanwhile, on the other side of Hithlum, Huor's widow, Rian, gave birth to a son at the year's end, whom she named Tuor. After entrusting the child to the care of the Sindarin elves who dwelt in the caves, Rian's heart shattered with unbearable grief. She went to the place where Huor had fallen, lay down there, and passed away in silence. The unnumbered tears washed away the final hope of Beleriand. An age of heroes had drawn to a close in blood and fire, replaced by an even more desperate era, shrouded in darkness, betrayal, and endless sorrow.